Welcome to The Geek in Review, a podcast focused on innovative and creative ideas in the legal industry. I'm Marlene Gaybauer.
And I'm Greg Lambert.
Today we have Conrad Everhard, founding partner of Flatiron LLP, a pioneering law firm offering innovative flat-fee M&A services. With a rich background from elite global firms, Conrad is leading the Flatiron's charge to modernize legal services through technology and client-focused solutions. Conrad, welcome to The Geek in Review.
Hi. Happy to be here.
We're glad
happy
to have you.
Yeah, definitely. Conrad, probably a number of our listeners are unfamiliar with Flatiron, so do you mind giving us an overview of Flatiron itself and your role within the firm?
I can give you an overview of the origin story because that's how
we love origin stories.
Yes.
The founders, me and Mark and Lenny, were former big law partners, principally M&A partners, although Lenny was more of a technology commercialization guy. We were connected with each other at some point at Jones Day or at a Greenberg Traurig, different places. After the financial crisis, we had all left to make our fortunes in the private sector. We didn't make our fortunes, but we reconnected with each other. And when we re-entered the private law firm space, this now 7-8 years ago, the reception to us from big law wasn't all that welcoming, given that we had been detached from a book of business for a few years. And the other thing is, all of us were connected in one way or other with the legal tech community, with the business model evolution community. All of us had banged our heads in big law trying to create some change. And we realized that our advanced age, that it wasn't going to happen within big law in our professional lifetimes. And we were all motivated to be more disruptive, to try to test the model. And the other thing, Greg, is that after looking at legal tech and challenging the model now for 25 years plus, by the mid-2010s, there was a convergence of the stars that made this kind of thing possible. First of all, the acceptance of the virtual model for firms like VLP, which I was at for a couple of years, Ryman and Fisher Broyles, and the alternative legal service providers. They were already out forging an identity as a principally virtual practice, so that had been accepted. The second thing that was available to us is that we had access to this almost unlimited pool of artisanal trained senior labor. The big law has this crazy model where they invest all this time training all these young attorneys, but only 10% of them ever get picked from the choir to make partner. It's like the old movie Logan's Run if you're my age. If you reach 10 years out, they either park you in some service position if there's a lot of work, or they throw you out. So you have all this well-trained labor. They may not be business generators. That's why they weren't elevated to partner, but they try to find in-house positions, but a lot of them wind up as bodies at Axiom or at United Lex or whatever. So you have this big pool that people have trained for me already that I don't have to train, that I can tap into. And the other thing, Marlene, obviously, is the mid-teens, you had access now to computing power by the cup. You don't have to build these, like Venture Law Group and VLP had to spend this $4 or $5 million 20 years ago to build the infrastructure. Now I have those tools accessible to me, not only tools and power to run my law firm, but also tools and powers to do cool things with automating the workflows and the processes so we could be more innovative. So all those things converged at the same time. And we decided to, like we always tell our clients, we decided to get outside the firewall of big law firms and take this incredible risk and put our own money into it and create this kind of new model law firm. So that's our background. That's what led us to create Flatiron. And from there, 7 years later, we're here.
Yeah, it sounds necessity is the mother of invention, and that kind of gave you guys the push you needed to do the type of experimentation that you were doing. But I know that many of you had a background in M&A services, but you came up with something very disruptive, which is offering flat fee M&A services. When I met you at Legal Innovators California, I'm like, what? So tell us a little bit about what motivated you to make that sort of decision to offer flat fee M&A services
So we're Flatiron. We're supposed to be this disruptive law firm. And me and Mark had this idea pushing the model. But how do you do that, and where do you go with it? So the obvious place, try to bring more transparency and predictability to the fee structure and bring down the rates. So we started experimenting flat fee structures, not really feeling ourselves in the dark room trying to figure out how to do that. And now over the course of several years, we've become pretty good at it, and we've developed a tripod of things that we rely on to allow us to price ourselves on a fixed fee basis. One of them obviously is low overhead. We're the virtual law firm like Ryman and Fisher Broyle. I'm sitting in my girlfriend's living room right now. Do have office at WeWork, and we do have we have a full set of law firm applications, but everything is online. So we don't have the heavy overhead footprint of big law, which in and of itself allows us to price ourselves more attractively, and that's basically what VLP and Ryman do. The big secret about VLP, where I was for a couple of years, and Ryman and the other folks, is they're basically the same model as big law. They just have lower overhead, so they can have lower rates, but they're charging by the hour, and they do everything else the same. One of the reasons I left VLP, I wanted to create something different. Two, we talked about before, access to all this labor. So now I'm looking at, it was a eureka moment. Now that I'm on a flat fee basis, I'm no longer making money marking up junior labor. That's not my model anymore. I don't make money by being inefficient. I have to rethink everything and rethink, how do I produce the service at the same level or even a better level of quality than big law, but at a much lower price, a more predictable price. So one is the overhead, but secondly is the way I deploy labor. Labor is now a cost center to me. It's a utility. It's not a profit center anymore. So we've adopted principally a general contractor model, just like the general contractor in a construction home. We don't have experts on our balance sheet. We have long-standing relationships with tax firms, benefit firms, transactional firms, CFIS firms that we use on a project basis when we need them. They spend whatever time they need, and it passes through our invoices. Junior labor, we just talked about. I got access to all this talent. Over the past 5-6 years, we've developed a deep bench of contractors. Some of them have become partners with us, but a lot of them are just contractors. A lot of them are the Axiom model, and a lot of them are people that left big law for whatever reason, because of family or otherwise, but they have highly evolved skills, and we pay them better than Axiom on a project basis. So they come on. So that allows us to radically change the way our pricing model, because we're deploying labor differently. The other thing, and this I have to give a lot of credit to my partner Lenny, who you can talk to whenever you want. Lenny he's a computer science guy at Boston College, an amateur software developer, an architect. When we formed Flatiron, it was all hands on deck. He's a technology licensing lawyer, but I said, you got to help me out with due diligence. We don't have bodies here. We're doing M&A. We went after M&A because big law is so grossly inefficient that no matter what we price ourselves out, there's going to be a lot of margin. But I said, you got to help me out with processing due diligence here. He's looking over my shoulder, and he's like, as a non-M&A lawyer, and he says to me, what the heck are you doing here? This is the most inefficient process I've ever seen. You take data from the client, the seller, in an M&A transaction, and you spend a lot of time finding the data, so you deliver it pursuant to the due diligence request. Then you go back to the same data to answer the rep and warranties, and you go back to the same data again to do the disclosure schedules and to post-closing integration. Why don't you organize and flow the data in one place? And that's what led to the building of what we now call Deal Driver. We created a deal platform. It's a workstream efficiency platform that basically chaperones the due diligence through each phase of the deal. And we brought in all kinds of applications, including Airtable. That's been our base platform. We've evolved that over the years to do lots of other things. We extract intelligence from the data. We use AI, and Lenny likes to say HI, which is human intelligence, which is well-trained paralegals that are not lawyers and are not charging $800 an hour. They're charging $35 an hour. So we combine them with AI and some technology leverage to extract intelligence like assignment clauses and change of control provisions and whatever. Marlena, again, a sidecar story here. this technology platform that we created as an internal utility, it was just an internal utility for us, just like any other consulting company creating a utility, became so popular with the clients because of the way it organized the data that they kept pushing us to both use it, but also to improve it. And it wasn't really usable by third parties because it's a Frankenstein monster of different apps. So finally last year, we spun everything off into a sidecar. We raised a little bit of money, and we're actually porting our application to our own proprietary platform. And what we do with it, I don't know, but we're doing that. That's how we started experimenting with M&A, and we started doing these things with labor, with technology, and they've allowed us to price ourselves on a fixed fee, more transparent basis.
Well, Conrad, I wanted to ask before we dive into some of the disruptions on the billing model, I'm very interested in your approach on the labor side of things and your finding the talent, because I think a lot of times the industry does not look at all of the talent that is essentially sitting on the sidelines in the industry. What does one of your contractors look like? Are they out of California? Are they male? Are they white? Are they female? What does the labor pool that you pull from, is there any trends that you see or consistency?
It's 10, 15 years out. Wilson Sonsini, Davis Polk, Simpson Thatcher. I'm just thinking on Skadden. A lot of times don't have the skills to generate business because most lawyers are academics. That's what I always tell my girlfriend, I'm an academic. But most lawyers are academics. They're not salesmen, so they don't get picked from the choir. So they're highly skilled, but they've been out 10, 15 years. They're talking to Axiom. They don't want to go in-house because a lot of them have young families. A lot of them are female. So they have young families. They can devote 1,000 hours a year, but not 3,000 hours a year. That's the model. Now, we've had some folks with us for a long time. Some folks come and go. Some folks go back into big law, and we can always dip back into the pool. Right now, we have an overflow of talent because M&A's been slow. So a lot of the senior talent's been let go. 2 years ago, we were looking for talent because when M&A was going crazy. But that's the profile. The profile is that senior associate counsel person who, for some reason or other, sometimes it's personal, sometimes it's economic, reached the end of the line in big law. And now they're facing the prospects of trying to find an in-house position, which is not trivial, selling themselves out as a body to the alternative to United Elects, which they don't want to do. We pay them better. We pay them more than Axiom does. I'm not going to put numbers out. We pay them more by the hour than they would there. And we're also pretty cool. So people, when we go out on
coolness factor, that's it.
Yeah, when we go out on LinkedIn and look, and that's where we principally find our labor. When we go out on LinkedIn, we say we're Flatiron, and you get the B and Deal driver, our sidecar. And I don't know if you've followed us, but we've been collaborating with Stanford and the legal laboratory over there, Kodak.
I do want to ask about that. We should add a question later.
So everybody, so we're cool. It's funny because it's funny because I'm not going to name any names, but the folks that I came up through the system with at Jones Day and at Brian Cave before that, they're reaching that age where the service partners are reaching the magic age where if you're not a big business generator, you got to retire. And they've all made plenty of money in the system, so they're going off the pasture now, and they're looking at me and saying, wow, what you're doing is so cool. I wish I was doing that. And I'm like, no, I don't know.
They're not ready. They're not ready to be put to pasture yet. They're like, we still
have... I don't think they could do this unpredictability of a startup law firm, but it's funny. It is the coolness factor.
Let's talk about the client who has M&A work and they're looking for a different approach of doing their M&A work. How do you pitch the style of work that you do at Flatiron to them and make them comfortable with the disruption? Because the old saying is no GC got fired for hiring, Kirkland.
Yeah, there's a question here about one of our challenges. One of our challenges is that GCs are conservative and not risk takers. So they talk a lot about innovation, but not a lot of them are actually willing to take the dive. And for that reason, we're still principally on the sell side. We're trying, we think that our efficiency model has more value on the buy side, and we do some buy side work. We're doing some buy side work right now. But we do principally sell side, and a lot of the opportunities come from the bankers. So our pitch, Greg, is we're not cheap, but we're cheaper than big law. So we're competing with big law. We're doing middle market M&A transactions, principally in the technology sector, but also in other sectors. We're typically representing bootstrapped entrepreneurs selling their businesses to private equity or to strategic buyers. We're talking about $5 to $200 million. We're not doing public deals. Typically, the private equity is represented by Magic Circle or Kirkland Ellis or whatever. We're cheaper than them. We're not cheaper than local law or little law, but we price ourselves 40, 50% below big law. So that's right off the bat if that's what you care about. Now, some private equity funds don't care about the price because it all gets passed into the deal. But we're selling transparency and predictability. So now you know exactly what you're going to pay and it's predictable. If you're doing a bucket of deals, you know what you're going to pay. But the third thing, but we're selling other things too, Greg. We're selling adult supervision. You're not under our model, you're dealing with me or you're dealing with somebody who's senior. If you look at, rather than the big firm model where you have some partner sitting on top of a pyramid of young labor, we're sitting on a Ferrari, that a senior partner is sitting on a Ferrari, which is partially labor, but partially it's technology, partially it's AI. And he's using all those tools to enable him to drive the deal. He's usually the interface with the client. So you're dealing with a partner level person at Flatiron, which is what we pitch. And frankly, again, coming back to Deal Driver, our little sidecar, the platform that we created for ourselves, what we found is that private equity in particular appreciated the way we organized the seller's data. We took this unstructured mess of data from these bootstrapped entrepreneurs who had no professional assistance, and we organize it and we silo it and we code it and we tag it and we parse it and we flow it through the deal. So what that does for private equity and for buyers is, one, the data surfaces early. So issues are surfaced early, problems are surfaced early, deals break early if they need to break, or they're fixed early if they need to be fixed. And they're getting data which synchronizes with their other deals. If they're doing multiple deals, that's why they keep pushing us to, can you do this? Can you let me do that? Can you improve here? Can you synchronize the financial statements with my financial statements? If you go to our website, we talk about, we do better deals. And that it was purely accidental. It was not something that we expected. We created this platform. We asked the client and the other side, get on it because it makes us cheaper. And then they started liking it. And what happens, ironically enough, is the private equity won't hire us. They'll stick with Kirkland and Ellis, but they'll refer us to their targets. And they'll say, go to that target and fix them up and clean them up. That happens a lot. So there's a whole series of value propositions that go beyond just the fact that we're cheaper, but being cheaper is helpful.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that your clients continue to come back to you, or are they one-time clients? What is, especially being on the seller side?
The problem with sell side is I lose my clients, right? Because they get sold, and then in our deals, there's almost always earnouts and stuff, so it winds up dragging on for years. But the sellers become, for us, loyal reference sources. And by the way, they're also investors. Almost all of our investors in the platform are former clients that used it. So they support us that way as well. The folks that like us and our multiple referrers are the bankers. And the bankers like us because our interests are aligned. The enemy of the fixed fee is time and inefficiency. The longer a deal drags, the less money I make and the more at risk I am. I have every incentive with them to prosecute the deal as efficiently as possible with the best outcome than anybody else, because I don't make money being inefficient on labor. And the bankers appreciate that. That doesn't mean that we don't break deals. We're still a fiduciary to the client. God knows we have 2 broken deals this year. But we try to surface the problems early. So the bankers like the platform. They also like the organization of the data, and that's because they are our best sources.
I had a follow-up question. Conrad, you had mentioned earlier that you do think the model would be good for the buyer side. And I'm curious, given that we're talking about hourly billing and that this would reduce that, if this were the model that we're using, what's the pitch for the buyer side?
The pitch for the buyer side is I'm going to do if you're a private equity fund and you have a portfolio of acquisitions, I'm going to synchronize your data so that all of your deals are synchronized with the same paradigms, the same parsing, the same coding. So if you want to know how much toilet paper you're buying across 6 different portfolio companies, you're going to get a better deal. You're going to get better data. The buy side, the strategics care about pricing. The private equity don't care so much about it, but they do like the predictability. Also, with the private equity funds, management teams, they get paid on EBITDA. They get paid on basically your cash flow, free cash flow. So they do care about expenses and transaction expenses. But the reason why we think our value proposition makes more sense for the buy side is because they're doing multiple acquisitions, and using our process can really make them more efficient and help them manage their data better.
Do you have any concerns given some of the new technology, particularly kind of the Gen AI explosion? Do you have any concerns on that side that big law can harness some of that and put together models that might be similar?
The problem with big law is they have now an institutional commitment to a model of inefficiency by selling hours and marking up junior labor. You see, I just wrote about this in the Thomson Reuters article, there's a lot of buzz about innovation at the big firms, but their prices keep going up.
It's going to go up again this year.
Yes, so whatever innovation they're absorbing internally, they're not sharing it with the client. So am I concerned about big law coming up with I imagine that at some point there's going to be some progressive big law firms that understand the advantage of pricing themselves better but retaining the margin by using efficiency. With any other business, they're going to understand that if they can price themselves lower, they're going to be more competitive, and if they can retain the margin, then they win the game. I think maybe out of the magic circle, because they're in the British Empire stuff where there's less regulatory barriers, they may want to create an off-brand spin-off, an edgy kind of more progressive brand that they can have in a sidecar. But honestly, Marlene, I'm not losing any sleep over big law evolving. That's an ocean liner. I
don't want you to lose sleep, but that makes me sad.
but I think that there are I think there's going to be some big law, but in order for it to work, big law, it can't be that you're automating the non-billable stuff and not the billable stuff. In order for it to work, is you have to pass on some of that efficiency back to the client in a business sense, and that I don't see that happening. And for that to happen, frankly, guys, would require a lot of dramatic surgery to their model. I was there for 20, 30, whatever I was there for, 20 plus years. I know their compensation structure is based on it, their training and the young lawyers. I think other startup law firms could imitate what we're doing. And frankly, I think that the non-law firm competitors that are right on the cusp of practicing law, the United Lexes and the LSAPs and the consulting and the accounting firms, the legal Zooms of the world. We've been looking with keen interest at what's happening in the sandboxes in Utah and in Arizona. You can bring in non-lawyers, you can raise capital. None of it's not as exciting as you might sound, because I've talked to them and they're moving fairly slowly. But there's going to be somebody who's going to apply traditional business principles, which includes the application of technology and the deployment of labor differently. It's going to compete with big law for this kind of work. So I don't know when that happens, but those are the people actually I think are more interesting.
Yeah, I was going to follow up on that with the big law model has the risk of disruption based on just traditional hourly rates, marking up labor. that type of traditional billable work. But you're not without risk either.
Yeah.
In coming in with a disruption to a traditional industry standard of how M&A work is done. So what do you do at Flatiron to mitigate the risk for yourself as you go along and make sure that if you've priced something incorrectly, how do you adjust for that? So is there particular risks that you monitor as you make these deals?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and obviously we've built in a lot of safeguards into the fixed fee pricing like everybody else who does fixed fee pricing. The biggest risk I told you was time. We usually bake in a 90-day window. If the deal takes more than 90 days, we know we would keep the right to revisit. And we also build in extraordinary circumstances. And in the first instance, guys, we have to do due diligence on the deal. So we have to look at things like corporate governance, because it's a single owner, but if there's a big stockholder base and there needs to be a stockholder meeting, whether there's hostile parties, whether there's employment agreements, whether there's any issues in the due diligence and litigation or whatever, or employee issues. So we take and also the structure, of course. We tend to deal with a lot of companies that have been structured as S corps or LLCs, and they're more complicated, frankly, from a tax perspective, particularly the S corps. You have to do reorganizations to make them suitable for purchase. We factor all those issues in, and we do have some escape hatches, including time, that we build into the model. And sometimes we get burned. If you play this game, that's one of the reasons the big firms are really reluctant to play this game. When you play this game, sometimes you get burned and you wind up doing a lot more work than you're getting paid for. And sometimes you make more. Sometimes everything goes. And remember, I'm not going to throw numbers out there, but you can guess big laws charging on these middle market M&As anywhere from $500,000 up, and we're pricing ourselves about half of that. There's a heck of a lot of margin in there, and we've driven through our processes, our labor deployment, the way we do things. We can typically drive what we call the non-equity partner costs of the deal. So the junior labor and the expert labor and the third-party deal costs, we can drive it well under $100,000. It doesn't take us to a big number for us to making decent money for the firm and ourselves. So it's not surprising, because you couldn't think of a more inefficient way to run a deal than the way it's done now, by throwing armies of bodies at it at $800 an hour. That you can get to that place without a lot of creativity. You can get to a place which is half the price without a lot of creativity, and we're pretty creative. So yes, there's a lot of risk, and Lenny talks about that a lot. That's one of the things. If you want to do fixed fee law, you have to be willing to take some risk, and you leverage that with upside. Yeah. We have breakup fees. We've built in all kinds of things into our model.
Okay.
So when you first started Flatiron and this flat fee offering, how did the market react, including clients and competitors, and have you seen a trend over time regarding the reaction?
There's two kinds of clients out there. There's the clients that go and attend Legal Innovators California, where we were just together, that are looking for progressive stuff and are looking for new models and application of technology, and those people tend to gravitate to us. But they're still the minority. There's another group out there that talks a big game, but they still continue to use Kirkland & Ellis. And then there are the traditionals who are not moving off Jeffrey Moore's crossing the chasm. You got a lot of people that are part of the legacy community that are not really interested in taking any risk with a smaller firm. I think we have built some street cred over the past 7 years. We've done, I don't know, 20, 30 M&A deals, probably more at this point, all various sizes. We have a track record that we can point to. We have happy clients and we have success stories and we have a platform that we can demonstrate. And we're doing all this cool stuff, and we're pretty good at getting it out on LinkedIn and other social media, the AI stuff we're doing. So right now it's easier than it used to be, Marlene, but it's still not a walk in the park. I still, we even get clients who say, we want you to shadow bill by the hour so we can, what's the point
That's
of
still
that?
a thing?
Now you're giving me the worst of both worlds. I have to do the inefficiency of keeping my hours, and I gotta give you a flat fee. So and in terms of competition, I don't see anybody doing what we're doing. I know there's a few people doing things like this in immigration law and other areas where they've moved to a more automated. Our competition is big law when the client is price insensitive and wants to stay legacy. And our other competition, frankly, is we get mistaken for small law, which we're not. We're more expensive than small law. If you want to use small law to fight against big law, good luck. But we run into that. Occasionally we run into regional offices of big firms, like last year when there was no M&A at all and the dinosaurs were starving. They were coming way down in price to compete. So we have plenty of price competition, but when you look at it from a big law, we do pretty well.
You'd mentioned that there are other practices that benefit from this type of efficiency, immigration law being one. Is there any type of practice that, now that you've mastered the M&A flat fee deal, that Flatiron might look at expanding into other practices?
Yeah, do that, or frankly license our platform to other law firms that are in those practices. Anything that's heavy duty transactional and that requires the movement of a lot of data. We do venture capital, private equity, M&A, we do technology licensing, and unfortunately we still do a lot of startup work just because they insist on coming to us. We don't really market that and we actually price that very differently. But anything, commercial lending, project finance, commercial real estate, anything that involves a lot of documents, a lot of closing documents, a lot of data that needs to be moved and organized and parsed and read due diligence lends itself to our process. And yes, we do have ambition to move into those areas or to license others to use what we've built in those areas. We like M&A because there's no point on the horizon, Marlene, where I'm expecting M&A, the big law firms on the other side, to tell me, oh, we've reduced our price by whatever. Occasionally what happens is that the buyer puts a cap on them, and then they come to us and say, can you run most of the deal because we're capped? So are we. But so that's the answer to that. I assume, Marlene, you want to touch upon it?
I do, but I was going to ask one other question, because we talked a little bit about your model and the folks that you bring in to assist in terms of your human review. What opportunities do you think this kind of model affords, like new attorneys coming in?
That's a good question, because we're so early in the game that we cheat. We don't train. We let them train, and then we take them after they're trained. At some point, we're going to have to build our own labor base. But we're nowhere near having to do that, because we have a surpluses of labor which has been trained by other folks. If you looked at this holistically on a 20-year horizon, 30-year horizon, the application of technology, workflow management, and workflow automation plus AI theoretically should reduce the number of lawyers that you need to process deals the old-fashioned way. That's reluctant to say it's going to reduce the number of lawyers, because my experience with evolution of technology over my career is that every time technology has been introduced, it's created more work. So I just have more deals to do. So I'm not sure where that goes, but I do know that you'll be able to do deals more quickly and more efficiently. Whether that means less lawyers, I don't know. The other thing, though, is that from a lifestyle perspective, getting off of this, I have a daughter who's in big law, getting off of the treadmill of the 3,000 hours, it's very hard to maintain a social life with. In the 2500s, I did all that stuff 30, 25 years ago. It on the horizon, you could see a time when, the advanced and the premium lawyers can have a better life and still process premium work at the same level of quality. I don't know how it all plays out, but that's what I'm thinking, what is going to happen at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So, and young people, of course, gravitate to us because what we're doing is, at least optically, is cool.
Mm-hmm. Very quickly, there was something you mentioned about taking advantage of having big law train the attorneys and then being able to take advantage of that later in their career. Are there any bad habits that big law trains that
Yes,
you need to break?
Of course. And that's when you're asking about training, that's a very good question, Greg. And we have to explain to them, because
you can't take 6 hours to answer a 5-minute question.
And we train them on our technology. You have to leverage what we're doing. We put fairly tight guardrails because, frankly, they're just a cost on the balance sheet, on the P&L statement. It's the bigger that cost item is, the less margin I have. So we manage them just like any other place manages labor. It's no longer a profit center. So yes, there is a little bit of deprogramming required when we bring the folks in. Although again, most of the folks that come in to us have an idea about what we're about. So they know that we're not doing it the old-fashioned way. But yes, that is always a challenge, getting people. And the other thing is, it's funny, and I get, because having a kid in law school and having young lawyers working with us all the time, you would think that they were cutting edge when it comes to technology. They know how to use their laptop, but that's about it. It's not what you think. There's a lot of training involved.
Okay, Conrad, so now I would like you to tell us a bit about your work with Stanford and Dr. Megan Ma.
Yeah, I'll talk about it in a very, and I can send you some links to. So
please.
Because we're cool and we are probably the only law firm doing this kind of premium transactional work with
and humble. Cool and humble.
Well, look, unlike our labor force, I have to sell. And I was promoted from the choir because I was a business generator once upon a time in big law. But so we ran into Megan, who we know, Megan Ma, and at Legal Innovators a couple of years ago. They're doing them in Stanford has a legal laboratory, a legal tech laboratory called Codex, where they experiment with all kinds of open source stuff. And they invited us, because they knew we would be willing to spend the non-billable time, they invited us to participate, to collaborate on a project to create a training simulator, an M&A for big firm lawyers. They have, and we still have, a bunch of crackerjack AI developers in the Middle East, actually, and Megan's obviously involved. And it became, if you listen to my story in California, for me personally, it became a very frustrating project because the intelligence behind the project was unfortunately me, which is a kind of a scary proposition. But what we did, they had grand ambitions to create an M&A negotiation simulator. They didn't know a lot about M&A, and they didn't know a lot about the sensitive points that arise. So what we did is we went for the term sheet in the first instance, which hasn't been completed, and we carved out a slice of the term sheet, which is we carved out the liability profile. I know you M&A experts are going to say, oh, it's covered by M&A insurance, but not always, particularly in the smaller deals. We picked the M&A profile, the liability profile, because it's so codified, so structured. The caps and baskets and survival periods and fundamental reps, non-fundamental reps. You could define all those things. And what we found, guys, is in the first instance, when we tried to ask the large language model to to respond. It was just junk. On a naked basis, throwing complex issues on M&A to a large language model without prompting or guidance was useless. And it actually discouraged me when we started this project. By the way, I thought this was going to be a 1-month project a year ago or 2 weeks. And so what we did over time, and we learned a lot about, Lenny would say, prompting, guiding, putting guardrails around the model, pointing the model as to what we wanted to look for. We started feeding them, spoon feeding the model pieces of the liability profile. A fundamental rep is this, a non-fundamental rep is that. The market rate for a survival period is this, and the market rate for a basket is that. The non-fundamental reps, the sensitive points are cybersecurity and intellectual property. And over a course of time, with me writing basically a mini treatise and Lenny parsing it and turning it into spoon bites for the model, we went through this over a course of 6-7 months. And then one day, as I said, in California, we're playing around with the simulators. So this is supposed to create an agent, which is now going to negotiate with the lawyer and teach them. So at some point, I started playing with the simulator, and I said I was frustrated because I've been doing this now for 7-8 months. And I said, I want 50%. I want a 50% cap on liability in a 5-year survival period. And the agent came back to me and said, you're out of your mind. That's not market. It should be 12 months, and it should be 20% capped at 15 or 20%. And then I said, wow. Then I woke up, because then we had prompted the model. And if you go, and I'll send you the link, I'm sure you've seen it, of the demo that Megan Ma has done. Why is this relevant to anything? And partially because we may actually take the next iteration of this and take it private, because it's open source right now, anybody can use it. But also, we learned so much about how to use large language models to both summarize information and find complex information by prompting it. And we're, needless to say, going to incorporate some of that learning into our own due diligence and intelligence extraction efforts. So now when we use this HI, we're going to add AI, so that make that even more powerful. So it's a cool story, and for all the effort I put into it, it gave me a lot of publicity. So now I can't. But I was not 6 months ago, I was not that happy about it. And by the way, now we're opening up the tent to everybody to participate. We need tax lawyers to prompt, and we need other experts, and we're going to create a village here of different experts that are contributing to this thing. So it's been a very cool experience at the end of the day, and it's useful to what we're trying, our vision.
I hope that we can help in getting the word out for those volunteers.
Yeah, if you have volunteers and your firm wants a volunteer, we got a couple law firms that want to volunteer. There's equity in there for the next iteration. It's a for-profit enterprise, the next iteration. And
that might spark some interest, right?
It also helps Flatiron, which is always nice.
Yes.
I don't know, that I blew you guys away with all my stream of consciousness.
You have done a great job, and we have one more question for you that we ask everybody. And I think you're a great person to ask this question. So we ask all of our guests what we call the crystal ball question. So you look into the future for us and tell us what, it sounds, he's not liking this.
No,
and tell us on the horizon for the legal industry that will be a change or a challenge that you think Flatiron or others in the industry will face in the next 2 to 5 years.
It's so hard for me to predict radical innovation in the legal industry, because I've been predicting it for so long and it hasn't happened. But I go back to what I said before. I think if you're looking at a 20-year horizon, there's going to be somebody, probably out of the magic circle, because they're already dabbling in innovation, who's going to spin off something and offer a different model to challenge the market and to try to get themselves a lead in a changing marketplace. And they're going to bring down their price, their rate structure by using innovation, and keep their margins, so they're going to be in a very competitive position. I imagine it would be done in some sort of a spin-off or off-brand, because if you tried to do it within the firm, it would be so disruptive to the compensation system and the promotion system. But I can't believe that there's not going to be somebody who makes the jump in the next 10, 20, maybe 5 that's out there to do something radical. I think there's going to be more Flatirons out there, and we're going to try to power them up by licensing some of the stuff that we've created to create some competition and to create a market. And then thirdly, again, what I said before, beware the alternative legal service providers and the alternative providers of legal services. Combine them with the sandboxes, which are very mature at this point. And the sandboxes were not really built for commercial, for profit. They're really more social oriented. But when they're the full amount of the full potential of the sandboxes can be met, and you combine them with the LegalZooms of the world or the ALSPs and others, there's a potential there for some real competition to law coming from outside of law, because now a company with a public company with shareholders can raise money and compete and provide legal services out of the sandbox. Now, I talked to Utah about it, and they're not really ready for that yet. But in theory, that's when you're asking me to think 20 years from now, you're going to have new entries that will force big law to evolve, because they won't have any choice at that point. But that's looking far in the future, and I still think for Flatiron there's a lot of green field under our model before anybody tackles us, and because it's going to be a while for the ocean liner to turn around.
As the great Yogi Berra says, it's really tough to make predictions, especially about the future.
Future of law, especially.
Especially.
I was involved in a startup 20 years ago. I've been preaching this stuff. That's why I got out and started just do it myself.
Yeah. All right. Conrad Everhard, founder of and founding partner of Flatiron LLP. We want to thank you very much for taking time to talk with us today.
Yeah, it was great.
And of course, thanks to all of you, our listeners, for taking the time to listen to the Geek in Review podcast. If you enjoyed the show, share it with a colleague. We'd really love to hear from you, so reach out to us on LinkedIn.
And Conrad, we'll put some links on the show notes for things that you've referenced. But for those listening, what's the easiest way for people to find out more about Flatiron?
You can go to flatiron.legal, our website. You can go to my LinkedIn address, Conrad Everhard. There's not a lot of Conrad Everhards out there. Or you can always email me. I'm at my name, ceverhard@flatiron.legal. And I'm always happy to talk philosophically about anything in legal business models, so don't worry about bothering me.
And as always, the music you hear is from Jerry David DeSica. Thank you so much, Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry. All right, Marlene, I'll talk to you later.
Bye.